Solosaurus, a podcast about one-player board and card games. My name is Brandon Waite.
And my name is Carter Mackey.
And this is episode 47, where we're talking about a game about dying alone on a big old spooky island, Seventh Continent. This is going to be one of our most anticipated reviews that we've ever done, I think. We've gotten a lot of requests for this, and I know a lot of people are interested in it because it made $7 million in its last Kickstarter.
That is just nuts.
Absolutely crazy. And $1.2 million on the first run. So, those people are just Scrooge McDuck diving into piles of cash at this point. Or maybe they're not. Maybe they spent most of it on the game. I don't know. But it made a lot of money either way. So we're going to be getting to that review in just a minute. But before we do, we're going to start like we always do with the news. And like always, the news is aggregated for us by tablefor1.me, which is run by Frederick Schultz. If you've not checked out that website, you should, because they are a great source for solo games news. And the first bit of news that we found this week is that Veil Wraith is coming from All or Nothing Productions. This is an interesting announcement because All or Nothing Productions is famous for having done 1066 Tears to Many Mothers and also Gloom of Kilforth, which is basically like a modern solo classic at this point. So this is a good, solid designer, solid publisher, and he is making a one-player-only fantasy deck-building game with an emphasis on narrative. All of that, to me, is interesting. I really love the idea of a one-player-only deck-building game. I'm not sure that I've seen that before. Besides, Friday, I guess you could consider a deck-building game.
Yeah, so, how many cards are there? I mean, do we know anything about it yet?
We have very few details about it at this point. Just an image of a fantasy woman in the woods doing whatever fantasy women do.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, being elvy or druidy or whatever.
Right.
And we know that it's coming Q1 of 2020 to Kickstarter. So if you are at all interested in the aesthetic of the Gloom of Kilforth games, but maybe thought those were too big or intimidating for you, or you just would prefer something in the deck building vein, it looks like this will be a little bit more manageable than those really big box games, at least just based on the description. Could be totally wrong about that when it actually comes out, but I think this would be maybe up your alley. So check out Veil Wraith when that comes to Kickstarter early next year. Our second bit of news and our final bit of news for this segment is not one that was on tablefor1.me, but which you will undoubtedly be hearing about in the next few weeks, and that is that Cephalofair Games has announced a sequel to Gloomhaven. And we just talked about a new kind of slimmed down version of Gloomhaven on here a few weeks ago called Jaws of the Lion. This is not that. This is full, big, giant box of stuff like the first one, only this is called Frosthaven. It's supposed to have 100 new scenarios and a dozen new characters, and it sounds like it's going to be as big as the first game. The idea that people could be finished with Gloomhaven and the expansion and ready for a whole nother big box version of this game is completely mind-boggling to me.
Yeah, they might not make their Kickstarter goal.
Yeah, I wonder if they'll make it.
Yeah.
It's really interesting to me, though, that something like this could even be possible. It says a lot about the state of the board game market currently, that you could have a direct sequel to a game as big as Gloomhaven, and it will almost certainly do amazingly well.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to probably crush, right?
Oh,
is there any reality where it doesn't?
No, there's absolutely no reality where it doesn't. And even if you were on the fence about it, do a quick Google search of the front cover for this game, and it looks incredibly cool and compelling. I mean, it's up in this north part of the world that maybe we haven't seen before. It has different versions of creatures and races that we already know. It has new classes, and that cover art is so dynamic and action-oriented. It just, I want it. And I'm nowhere close to beating Gloomhaven.
Yeah, how far do you think you are?
I would say I'm 10% of the way.
Okay.
I'm hoping to finish it before I die.
Oh,
and that doesn't seem super likely.
Yeah.
So I will not be getting Frosthaven, just because I can't imagine ever getting to a point where I'd play it. But Gloomhaven is an excellent game. It is unlike any other dungeon crawl fantasy type game that I've played before. If you've not played it, it does live up to the hype, I think. If you didn't get on board with Gloomhaven and you're more interested in this kind of snowy, icy, probably Skyrim-like setting, this is probably more up your alley. Definitely check that out. It's going to come out on Kickstarter in March of next year, so be on the lookout for that. And that's all we've got for the news this episode, because we're going to jump right into the review, because this is a big box game that's going to garner a lot of discussion, I think. This is for the Seventh Continent. This is a game that is designed by Ludovic Roudy and Bruno Sauter, I think. I'm probably mispronouncing those names. And publisher Serious Pulp Games. It was released in 2017 and plays 1 to 4 players. The Seventh Continent is a solo or cooperative choose-your-own-adventure style exploration and survival board game. You play as a character who is cursed, who has to wander this wild new land that is fraught with danger and wonders, using every ounce of wit and cunning that you have to survive, craft tools, weapons, and shelter in order to make it to the place where you can break this curse. And if you don't do that, you are going to die alone on this island.
Yeah.
You will almost certainly die. And we will get to that in just a moment, but we will start by talking about the components for this game. And Carter, what did you think about the components for the Seventh Continent?
Generally speaking, I think the art is pretty good, except for the character. The character art isn't my favorite. I think it's kind of weak compared to, I would say, the rest of the art for like the little terrain pieces you're putting out and event cards and everything. Cards are reasonable thickness in stock. I don't know, especially since there's so many of them. Card trays are nice. The little figures, mini, I don't know if you can even call them minis. I don't know what you would call them.
They're very minis.
Yeah, they're very small, and just whatever. I mean, the token, like the little standees would almost be nicer, or not, like they're almost nicer to use in a way, just because they're a little bit larger and they have the full color. It's pretty solid. It's a pretty simple construction because it's mostly just cards.
Yeah, I was actually surprised by opening up the box and seeing like, oh, it really is like 90% cards in this game. I mean, you've got a few dice. You have, at least in the Kickstarter edition, which is what I've got here, the discard tray that you can assemble and play from is really neat looking. It's nice to have a little tray that holds these cards. And actually on the discard tray, it has a reversible back that adds like a different gameplay twist depending on which side you use. I mean, it's a very small one, but I thought that was pretty interesting. Yeah. That was a nice touch. The minis, if you get the Kickstarter version, you'll have the option of playing with minis or playing with standees. Honestly, a lot of people are going to fret about not getting the minis in the new classic edition of this that has just been released, which is kind of a pared down version. We'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. You're not missing anything if you don't get the minis.
No.
They're fine. You know, they're whatever. You're just not missing anything. Unless you're a painter, and unless you're a painter who is willing to paint on an incredibly small scale, you're just not getting much value added, I think, by putting these in the game. Plus, with the little standees, you can actually see some full-color artwork of your characters. That does look better than the artwork of them on the cards.
Yeah.
One thing I will say, though, is I think the card quality is really good. It's a nice thickness, and it has like this super smooth finish on it that feels really nice to play with. The most impressive thing to me, though, is the artwork on the cards for the terrain. Because when you start building out this island, what you're going to be doing in the game is like drawing these terrain cards and laying them out to form like a big overworld map. It's really impressive looking on the table.
Yeah, it's just cool. There's just something awesome about putting the cards together and the island emerging. That's very satisfying.
Yeah, it's definitely, you get a different experience with this game than you do with kind of modular exploration games where there's not a set map in the beginning. Like those modular games are more replayable, which we will also talk about later. But the beautiful thing about this is as you explore, I mean, the production effort that went into making this a cohesive island is kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah.
It's really a feat that they have managed to put this together and make it look gorgeous on the table. It's just not like anything else I played in that regard. And in that way, I think the components for this are special. But yeah, it is just a box of cards, like 1,000 cards.
There's so many cards.
Oh my goodness. There are so many. It's pretty impressive. And the box for the Kickstarter edition, at least, is, I would say, generally nice and sturdy. I traded for my copy and it's just torn up all along the side of it, which is pretty sad.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I think it's fine. One thing I will mention here, though, is as much as I like the card trays, and as much as some people appreciate the fact that you can store sleeved cards in here, I have seen a lot of people complain about the fact that this doesn't hold all the expansion content that's out there. So if you have the expansions for this game, I think you can fit a couple of them in the card trays that are in this box. but you're not going to be able to fit everything. So you're going to have to probably store it in more boxes or else buy like a specialized crate or something for this. So that's kind of a bummer. But otherwise, I think the components for this are quite good. And the rules for the game are also, I would say, pretty solid. It's not the best rulebook I've ever read, but I read it through once, and I don't think I had to reference it more than 2 times when I played.
I think I might have. I think there were some things I wanted clarification on, and thought the order was like a little off, but it's fine. It's just whatever.
Yeah. One thing that we consistently mention when we talk about rulebooks is the fact that we don't like it when there is a solo rule specific section in the rulebook that like includes changes to the setup that aren't included in the setup section where you have to flip back and forth.
Because normally it's at the end of the rulebook.
Yeah. And in this one, and actually in a couple of the games we've talked about recently, that's not the case. It's baked in there. You can play this game true solo with one character, and there's not a special section of the rulebook. It just assumes right from the beginning that all these rules apply to multiplayer or solo play of the game.
Which is so nice.
Oh man, it's so good. It makes learning and setting up the game so much easier. So in that respect, I do really like the rulebook. So otherwise, the rulebook is just, it's fine. It's pretty average, I would say. And that brings us to the play of the game, because the play of the game is anything but average. I have never played a game like this before, period.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I mean, I've never played anything from it like it in terms of just like the feeling of exploring is just really unique to it. But also just this whole card-driven system that, I mean, is essentially akin to kind of like an adventure book in a way. But you're just pulling these cards out, you're laying them. I don't know. It's just it's really cool. And also just the fact that, like, you know, it might tell you, like in an adventure book, it says, you know, look up entry 150. Well, there might be 6 150s, and you have to choose one of them because it's cards, and you can choose multiple ones without revealing it. But you can't do that in a book.
That is so fascinating to me. So if you're not familiar with the Seventh Continent at all, the basic idea is you have visited this continent before, and you've gone back home, and there's something about your visit to this continent that is sticking with you and causing you to just like waste away, basically. And it's because you're cursed. And so somehow, either because you traveled back to the island or because you were teleported back to the island, it depends on the curse that you're playing with, you find yourself back on this island again, trying to remove the curse. So you're going to get in the Kickstarter version, 4 different curses at the beginning of the game. And they don't actually affect the gameplay in terms of like, they don't debilitate you in a scenario specific way or anything, but they will completely change the map that you interact with. They completely change what it takes for you to win. It's like playing a consumable scenario, basically. It's sort of like the world's longest escape room.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
And each of the curses are very different, just from my cursory glance. So you're going to get this card that tells you what kind of curse you have. You're going to get a little satchel where you can store some important items. And you're going to get 1 clue to how you can break the curse. And we don't want to spoil things in this review or anything like that. But one thing that I found interesting is on this, very first curse that you've got, it has like kind of a map that is very vague and undefined. But it does give you like a little bit of direction without words of what you need to be doing. Otherwise, it just says, pull card number whatever out of the box, lay it in the center of the table, and start exploring.
Yeah.
That's it. Like, it is totally up to you to figure out what you're supposed to do to break this curse. They only give you that one little bit of guidance to start. And so you're going to put this terrain card on the board. You're going to surround it with like these sort of misty fog of war type cards around the edges of it. And every turn, what you're going to be doing is basically either interacting with what's on the card where you're standing, or you're going to be trying to explore what's around you. And sometimes those are just other terrain cards that you can move on to and interact with what's on them. Other times, it's almost like you'll interact with like an event or a special piece of the landscape that you kind of zoomed in on, and you get a chance to interact with that. There are cards that you explore that have kind of that like blocks your progress to other parts of the island, and you just start interacting away and find your way forward. That's the core of the game.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's pretty simple, but I don't know. It's just that gradual of like putting things down, exploring it, like investigating, features that are on those cards. It's just a really, I mean, that's basically all you're doing, but it is great. And like you said, you have the sketched out map, so you have some kind of direction, but it's a vague map, but it is an actual visual clue. It's not just like an abstracted thing necessarily,
right?
Which a lot of games will do, I feel like.
Yeah. A lot of times what's on the terrain doesn't actually affect what you're interacting with, but on this, it really does. And so if you see something on here that looks like animal tracks, for instance, and you're, getting hungry and need to like start replenishing some of your life, interact with that card because you can probably hunt down an animal on that card, right? Or like on one of them, I saw like a dead animal laying on the ground. And I thought that's pretty cool. And it had a number next to it. When I walked up to it, it was the dead animal. That should not be a jarring experience for the thing that you interact with on the map to be the thing that you see.
Right.
But for some reason it is. It really must be something that we're just not used to.
I feel like the tendency in board games is to, have randomization for replayability and things like that. And this is like this more crafted experience with this specific island, and it's not randomized. As far as the layout goes, the events will change as you go through it, or at least some of the events will. But yeah, so I mean, there's visual clues that are intentional for that curse that you can use to help your progress.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that's important for us to mention here is like what's randomized and what's not. So when you're on a piece of terrain and you have some unexplored terrain around you, those mist cards that you see, before you can actually see what terrain is under them, you have to interact with that nebulous space. Basically, there's going to be some kind of event or item or something that you interact with before you see what the next bit of terrain is. And all of those are randomized and kind of tiered. So if you're on the first part of the island, you'll use the level 1 cards, or the second part, you'll use the level 2. And it may not be that way in every scenario. I haven't played every curse in the box, but
there was one tier that was just, I think, for like swampy land.
Oh, okay. So maybe it's structured more like thematically then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it was interesting to me because that part is random. Like you just have no idea what you're going to encounter as you start to explore. But beyond that, there's less randomization. If I explore one of these misty cards and I pass the event there and I'm ready to lay down a new terrain card, then I pull like card 109 from the box. But like you said, there could be just one 109 card. There could be 6. And then they also have green versions of those cards and a yellow version of the card. And you always pull the green cards first before you pull the yellow. And at first I was like, well, that doesn't make much sense. But it's because when you interact with the space that you're on, you can change it. Like fundamentally change it forever, that space.
Right. It's a different thing. You did something is gone, something new is there. It's just a really cool, like simple way to do that.
Yeah, it feels more video gamey in that way than probably any other board game that I've experienced because it's not completely randomized, I guess, because there was so much plan and intention here. It feels like, oh, well, I made this thing happen in a way that interacting, you mentioned, with things in Myst kind of changes the landscape for good.
Right.
Yeah, it definitely has a very strong Myst vibe.
Yes. Because, I mean, the whole idea is that you don't remember anything, really, or like you're kind of maybe piecing together slight details. So you're trying to figure it out. You're coming across strange things, like a corpse maybe, or just like an animal, like you said, and you're trying to piece it together, and you're like, well, here's an interesting looking cog. Maybe I'll use this cog later.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me what that does to your brain and how it feels to play this game. Like just knowing that paying attention to what's there on the cards art-wise matters makes you approach the game in a vastly different way than most board games that you play. And it makes me feel like I have far more agency in the world than I do in most board games. When I was playing this, that gave me a feeling of excitement and kind of nervousness almost that I have not experienced when I've played other board games. And like usually when people talk about how immersed they are in games, I don't really get it. Right? Like there's a certain amount of distance there for me. The theme doesn't pull me in. Sometimes mechanics I can get lost in. This is the first theme that I can think of that's really just like sucked me into what I was doing.
Yeah. So when you say nervous, you just mean just like the building tension?
Yeah, like the building tension of like, okay, I see a cave here in front of me and it's completely dark at the entrance. if I didn't have a torch, I probably wouldn't go in there because I know if I go in, it's going to say, do you have a torch? No,
Right.
then pull this card. And the card will probably say, well, you have to turn around and go back because you can't see in here.
Right.
But I did have a torch when I happened to stumble across this cave. And you could hear something coming from the back of the cave. And like, man, there's just knowing that there is something waiting at the back of that cave on a card somewhere in this box that fits with me exploring this particular cave makes me nervous.
Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm.
Isn't the growl is not a red herring.
Right. Yeah.
So I don't know. I just found all that to be really immersive and interesting. And so if you're looking for a game that gives you that feeling of exploration, I'm not sure that I've played a game that does it in as compelling a way as this one does.
Yeah. I mean, there are games that obviously have like an exploration aspect to it, but yeah, it's that crafted thing that is like, this is an intentional island that has been designed with these specific pieces on it. And I don't know, it really does. It creates a different enough an experience that I guess I just wouldn't have expected.
Yeah, I think it's partly that crafted experience. It's probably mostly that. The other thing for me is there's not like another major mechanic in the way of you and interacting with the board. For instance, I like games that give me the feeling of adventure and a compelling story and all that. So that's part of why I was interested in Gloomhaven. But I get Gloomhaven and I really like it. But Gloomhaven is not really an exploration and story game. It's a tactical combat game that has some story in it. And so it becomes more about those other things than it does about this. You spend most of your time trying to decide how to handle combat. In this game, you spend most of your time trying to decide what to explore and what not to explore. There aren't phases that you have to go through. Even if you were playing this game multiplayer, you just take turns in whatever order you want. If you and I are playing together, I can take 4 turns in a row if that's what we think is best.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, there's something about that kind of freeform structure or even lack of structure that makes it feel more like, well, I'm just exploring.
Yeah, you're just taking actions and yeah, there's no like round timer. It's just you're running out of life/energy with every action that you do.
Yeah, just an endless stream of actions, basically, as you just keep pushing forward on this island. All that to say, I mean, that's not that there aren't other mechanics in this game. There actually are several other mechanics that are worth noting here. And the main one is that when you interact with something, the fundamental kind of tension mechanically in this game is you have to pull cards from this deck in order to see if you pass the test and get to do the thing that you want to do. And what's interesting about that is when you pull cards from this deck, some of them will have a star on them or a half a star or nothing. And that will tell you how many successes you're getting, right? So if you get a half a star, if you have a card that fits with it to create a whole star, then that's 1 success. Each star is a success, which is fine or whatever. It's basically just an alternative to rolling dice at that point, if that's all it was. But what makes it different than just rolling a die is that this deck is your life force. So when you run out of cards in this deck, you're not dead yet, but you're going to shuffle that discard pile together. And in that deck are 4 or 5.
It's 4 generic ones and 1 specific curse
That's right.
card.
So 5 curse cards in this deck. And the first time you reveal one of those from your discard pile, you're dead.
Yep.
Which is interesting, because it really makes you think about, okay, do I want to pull extra cards to try to succeed at this test or not? Because it's not just pulling an extra card, it's depleting your life. There's a lot of tension. It also gives the designers a lot of space to play, I think, because some tests, the tension of the test isn't just, well, how many successes do I have to get? Well, that's a lot of successes. Tests also include a minimum number of cards you have to draw. So it's not just, do I draw more than the minimum that they say I have to? Sometimes it's like, you only need 1 success, but you have to draw 5 cards to do this thing. Do you really want to try to cross over these jagged rocks to get to the other side of this little inlet? You can do it, right? You're definitely going to pull enough cards that you'll succeed, but you're going to pull a lot of cards. That's an interesting choice.
It's so good. And it's really interesting in just how, like, there's just a lot of kind of knobs to turn in that from a design standpoint, because I like having dual purpose, like, cards or, any kind of components where these cards are your life. They're also how you choose successes and having things that modify how many of those cards you're drawing, But I mean, it's like the tension. Like, so you use the example of like, you only need one success, but you're drawing 5 cards. There's also like, well, you need 3 successes, but you only have to draw 1 card.
Yeah, and that's so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Because that means you need to have saved cards prior to this test and turned them into items and that sort of thing that can help you. So it's probably worth mentioning, whenever you do a test like this, you get to look at all the skill cards that you drew, and you get to keep one every time you do a test. And you have a hand limit, or like a pack limit or whatever, and so you can't keep all of them, or you need to be using them regularly to survive. And some of them will just say, like, get an extra success on your next test, which is really great, or draw 2 fewer cards. But there are also some in here that are items that you can craft. And so it might say, like, here's a club. That's cool. That's one thing that I drew on my first game. You have this club, or like you have the idea of a club. Now you need to find the materials on the island to make it, which is pretty interesting. Like, if you're, depending on the terrain that you're standing on, you might find some of those items there. Otherwise, you might have to pay for it out of your own life. But what's nice about that is now you have this club. It has maybe 4 uses before it breaks. But the next time you test combat and you're trying to like club a, seal or something next to the ocean, you're not really clubbing seals. You can expend this item one time to add to your successes or to draw fewer cards or something like that. That's where this puzzle really kind of comes to life for me. Is like you said, okay, yeah, you can only draw 1 card this time, but you have to get 5 successes.
Mm-hmm.
Good luck with that.
Yep.
Right? Like, you better have planned ahead before you got here. So it gives you this feeling of like, I need to be prepared for literally everything.
Yes. And it's so interesting. And there was even like 1 card I drew at some point where it told you like it was variable how many cards you would get to draw later based on how many successes you got as far as like adventure cards. Mm-hmm. And so it's that idea of like, okay, well, do I really want to try to high roll this thing and draw a bunch of cards by getting a lot of successes? Or do I just want to go for like the lower level? I don't know. It's just like, it's a cool system. I like it a lot.
I do too. I think it's very interesting, different than anything else I've played. It makes you make some very tough decisions about which cards to keep in your hand or get rid of if you're not crafting or playing things as fast as you would like. The other thing that's really interesting about it, though, is you want to use these items sort of sparingly because you want to have them there for when you have a really tough test and because they only have a few uses. But the thing is, you don't really know how to pace yourself in using them because the trick of this game is you don't know how many rounds it's going to last. You don't have a timer or anything like that. All you know is you need to be able to survive to the end of this curse. And let me tell you now, on this end of having played this game, some of these curses could take you like 6 hours to play through. So if you're pacing yourself as if this is going to be a 1-hour game, you are going to die real fast.
Yeah.
That's an element of gameplay that I don't think I've ever experienced before, where you're not really sure at all how much time is left before the end of the game.
Yeah, it's hard in knowing that. It's a weird thing. You just don't know how fast you're going to have to burn through your action deck, which is, essentially your life or energy. But yeah, you don't want to just like use all of these tools that you've spent time getting, but you also don't want to waste time and burn extra energy when you could be, using a shovel instead of your hands.
Yeah, exactly. I found myself at the beginning of the game going up against these tests that would have been much easier if I'd had proper equipment. But I was like, whatever, the deck of cards is pretty big. I'll just burn those cards.
Oh, man, the first realization of whenever it was like, oh, there's a lot of cards in this deck. I have a while. And then at one point, I got to reshuffle some of my discarded cards back into the main deck because I ate some food. And then I realized how much bigger my discard pile was than the active deck. And I was like, oh, this might turn out very poorly.
Oh, yeah. I had that same experience, too. I reached this point where I was like, I've got a ton of cards. And now it's like, oh, these cards are thicker than I realized. There's like 9 cards here. And I have no idea how close I am to the end of this game. What's really interesting about this is that as you play different elements of this game that you've experienced along the way, but just like didn't think much about, they sort of click, at least they did for me, with regard to how important they are for making it through the game in a way that made me feel like I was having an epiphany, right? So I was getting close to death. I had like 10 cards, and I realized like, oh, there's that creature that was laying dead on the ground that I mentioned earlier. Well, maybe if I tried to eat something, that would help. Because when you cook food in this game or eat it raw, you can do either. Cooked food, does more for you. You actually get to take cards from your discard pile and put them back in your deck to show that you're kind of like regaining a little energy. And man, there are a few times that I cooked something in this game where it was like, take 8 cards from your discard pile and put them back. That feels really good.
Yeah, it's awesome.
And what's even cooler is you can have completely depleted your deck and be at that point in the game where you're like, you've shuffled your discard pile, and if you draw a skull, that's it. And if you eat, you can actually take cards out of your discard pile that you're operating from, and that becomes a deck that you have to work through before you're going through your discard pile of cards again. Like, in other words, you put off losing the game for longer. And so I think probably the way this would work if I was a better player is you would get to this place where you probably will, by the end of the curse, be running low on the number of cards you've got, but you're just being intentional about searching out those places where you can hunt and keep replenishing. And it's sort of like that push your luck aspect of how far can I go before I really just start to die.
Right.
That is just something I've not experienced before. And something, too, that made me rethink what kind of game this is. It turns out, even though this is billed as an exploration game, and I think the reason that most people want to buy it is because it's an exploration game. In reality, this is a survival and exploration game.
Yeah, with, I would say, a little bit more emphasis on survival.
I think so too. And the more that I came to realize that, the more that I was starting to question a few of the design decisions here that are part of this game. So, for me, what's most compelling about this game is the exploration.
Yeah.
That's really neat. What I didn't anticipate is that going into those little caves and little places that you can explore all over the map, it's usually a bad idea to do that.
I mean, but I don't know. It's bad, but it's like you have to do it to some extent. I just feel like there's always like almost a push your luck feeling to those things. It's like, because I know I won't be able to make it if I don't do that. But it's using up energy, which is, you realize is, I feel like, at least for me, is more precious than I thought it was at the beginning. And things can go very poorly on those little side ventures.
Right, and they just might not net you anything. And like, meanwhile, there are other parts of the board that like you really should be spending your energy on if you want to get the pieces or items or whatever that you need to move forward. And so for me, that was kind of a hard pill to swallow. At one point, I was playing through a game, and I had 3 or 4 little encounters in a row where I thought, oh, that looks like a cool thing that will be helpful, right? Or if there's a cave here and I have a torch, surely I should go in because I'll be rewarded for having had this item at the right time and gone into the cave, right? That's good game design, at least from my perspective. But then it turned out like, no, you go into the cave and you get attacked by a big, giant monster that is going to hurt you really bad, right? And again, this is not really spoiler territory because there are multiple cards for what can happen in this cave. But I guess it's where the game leans on those multiple options for how a kind of an off the beaten path encounter could turn out. That's maybe where it starts to feel like too random and punishing for me. And I say that because my focus is now no longer on exploring. In fact, I'm thinking I probably shouldn't explore because I need to survive.
Yeah, and that's a weird conflict because the exploration is so good, and I don't want to be punished for exploring, at least in this way. I don't know. I'd like tension is good, but this kind of, I feel like for me, it goes a little beyond tension.
Yeah, it does to me too. It feels sometimes like you're getting a slap on the wrist for trying to go do this cool, interesting thing over here. Anybody who's listened to this show for any length of time will know I just keep bringing up Dark Souls, the video game, as an example of good game design because I really do think it's a brilliant work of art. One of the things that I love about that game so much is it's a very dark and punishing game. And you are always going to be tempted to stay on the critical path to get from one checkpoint to the next because it's just so hard to survive. But if you find some little like crack in the wall that looks like you might be able to fit through it, and you do go through it, and you fight the enemies that are in there or whatever, and you make it to the end of that path, you are always rewarded with something worthwhile. that is a great feeling. It's the game saying, hey, you did this cool thing. You took a risk and looked over here when you know you could have, made it to the next bonfire or whatever if you just kept going. So here's this thing that's going to help you out in the long run. In this game, I felt like there were several instances where I said, I'm going to go check out that cool thing over there. And the game says, oh, you do, huh? Cool. Mm-hmm. Well, you can make it to the end of this and you can beat the test and we're going to give you nothing.
Yeah, that's a bad feeling.
Yeah. I mean, that's not great. About midway through the first curse, I was like, yeah, I really shouldn't explore. I should just ignore most of this stuff that's around me so that I can just push on toward the critical path. And then it's like you're missing out on what makes the game special at that point.
Yeah, it's a weird, I don't know. It's strange because I feel like I should do those things, but I feel like I should ignore them at the same time. I feel really torn with like how it's presented. I feel like you have to kind of do them, but it's like you can never really invest too heavily. I don't know. It's just weird. It just doesn't, I guess it just doesn't jive for me.
Yeah. At some level, what we're talking about here is what makes a game experience rewarding, right? Because there have to be stakes for you to feel like you've accomplished something at the end of the game. There has to be something that you can lose. There has to be some real risk involved, or else when you get to the end of the game, you're just going to feel like, well, okay, like my win was almost scripted, right?
Mm-hmm.
So on the one hand, I like that going to explore these things does have an element of risk and danger and even punishment at times, because that means if I make it to the end of this curse and I win, it's going to feel so much sweeter that I did. But on the other hand, exploration games are a little bit different because what's rewarding about them is experiencing the place that you're exploring, right? And just experiencing the story that's in front of you. And I feel like I'm distracted from that when the stakes are so high in this. So if I was to beat one of these curses, and I haven't so far, I feel like I would have a great sense of accomplishment and reward. But I haven't had the experience of just being present where I am along the way.
Yeah. No, I would agree with all of that. I think if you succeed on a test or something like that, the idea that it could still kind of go wrong or sour is a bad feeling, because I feel like the randomness of getting the successes and like the passing or failing of the test that goes along with that. I feel like that if you just fail at doing what you're trying to do and something bad happens, I mean, I don't like being punished for exploring, but I guess that makes a little more sense to have another additional layer of randomness on top of that of passing or failing a test is, I don't know, just kind of strange.
Because even if you succeed on a test and you get a reward, you have still spent something from yourself, right? Like, this isn't rolling a die to resolve, and if you succeed, then there's nothing lost. You've drawn cards from your life deck to succeed at this task. And so that's where I think it starts to feel like a double slap almost.
Yeah.
I succeeded and I spent things to succeed and I still don't get anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. That doesn't feel great. And here's where we get to like maybe one of the most important parts of our review. It doesn't feel great any game that you play, but in this game in particular, losing is incredibly punishing.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense to me.
The downside of exploring a crafted world where all the pieces of the island fit together is that if you die, say, 3.5 hours into playing the first curse, like I did, if you want to see what happens at the end of that journey, and you do, you're going to have to play through all of that stuff that you just came through before you died, which at that point is like just going through the motions, right? Because you already know all the stuff that's there. Some of the exploration stuff will be different, but the parts of the exploring process that are most interesting are already predetermined.
Right. Well, yeah, figuring the stuff out, seeing how the island is laid out as you go through. You know all of that.
The key puzzles in the game, you know how to solve those puzzles already. It's not like the locations of different keys or whatever change during the process of this. The mystery is gone.
Yeah, but you just have to start over from the start with very little kind of randomization in that really core experience.
Right, and the randomization that's there is not kind of interesting random encounters, to me anyway.
No, yeah, I would say so.
It's just whatever is in the mist. Or maybe which green card that you draw, but even that's a kind of a rarer experience. So, yeah, it's a real bummer, honestly, that that's the way it works out, because I made my way that far into that curse, and I'm like, okay, well, now I feel like I've got a pretty good handle on how to play the game. I would have definitely played the beginning of that curse very differently if I had had a game under my belt. But at this point, after I invested that much time in it, I don't really feel like going back to play it.
Yeah. I mean, and you can start a different curse, I guess, to give yourself a break or whatever. But it's like there's still like a feeling of, it's not like, oh, well, maybe next time I'll get it. It's like, no, but I want to know what was going to happen. I want to know what's on the other side of like this cliff wall or whatever.
Right. And losing solo games that's like a regular occurrence for me. Right. And it doesn't feel that bad most of the time because I know there's always next time. And next time's going to be a different experience. This is where the non-modularity of most of what you're encountering here is a downside. If you think this is a game that is interesting and compelling for you, that is definitely something I would keep in mind. Your experience with this game, I think, will be quite a bit better if you purchase some of the extra scenarios, because then you've got other scenarios that you can go visit if you lose one, and it'll allow you to more easily have more time between plays to kind of forget what you encountered. And that's still not a perfect solution. But I guess what I'm saying is, if you think you won't like this part of the game, then double down on the game and spend more money on it and it'll get better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
I don't know if that's a good solution. It's not great. The other thing that really I find to be incredibly punishing, and I think you do as well, is the save system.
Yeah. The save system works by basically all of the characters, I guess. I mean, if you're playing this multiplayer or if you were controlling multiple characters, they all have to be on the same terrain tile. And then you start packaging everything up, and it has a specific kind of like order that you're doing this in as far as your skills, your items, has some like clever ways with cards of how to like remember how many uses you have left on your items. And there's the regular discard pile, which you will put in a spot. And then you also have like the past events, a lot of the events you've done previously, and you just put all of those things back into the box along with every other card that just makes up the board or the island and things like that back into the box. And so whenever you resume the game, you just kind of unpackage all of these things, unpackage your character, the different piles, except now anything you had previously explored, you now have to re-explore, go through spending the fog of war like actions and going through those events just to get back to areas you've already been. And that is awful to me.
Yeah, it's terrible. And what's really mind-boggling to me is that so many people that I've heard who review this game, and reviewers that I really like and respect, will say like the save system is one of the coolest parts of the game. Because, I mean, to its credit, one thing that it does really well is it has these great little dividers in the box that handle like keeping track of how many uses your items have left, right? I think when they say they like the save system, that's what they mean. You can pack it away easily. The downside to this save system is exactly the thing you mentioned. I should not have to go and re-explore everything the next time. That is a mechanical punishment for the fact that I don't have a table where I can just leave this set up for 7 hours of playtime. That's what it feels like to me.
Yeah, it feels like punishment. If I don't have to put it up, I'm not going to.
No, and what's really wild to me is that like I listened to a review from Rahdo of Seventh Continent, and I love Rahdo so much. He is one of my favorite reviewers to listen to. He is one of the people that helped get me into board games. I just adore the man. But one of the things that he said in his review was he likes the save system because, like, let's say you find a hut in the wilderness, and there's nobody home when you find it because there are multiple versions of that terrain card, and one of the versions is nobody's home. If I just go, at that point, like, I might just decide to save my game, go to sleep, come back the next day, and he might be there in the hut. And basically, he was trying to make the case that that's thematically interesting and, like, thematically real, that you might just go away from the game for a little while and come back and the game state has changed. I think that is a ridiculously generous way to interpret what's happening here. No. No, absolutely not. It's bad. That is not what's happening. You're not leaving the game for a while and coming back and the world has moved on. You are coming back to the game and you're being punished for not having a table where you can leave it set up. Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah, as far as some of the terrain cards, I would say there's very little like randomization as far as them being different, at least in just what I've played, which there's tons of curses I haven't, and it might vary a lot more with the other ones. I don't know. But yeah, like you said, like that's a generous take on it, because if you're losing all of that, I guess, energy that you've spent exploring previously, and during this like save system, you don't get to recuperate any additional energy. I don't understand that thematically at all, or anything along those lines.
No, it doesn't work, because the thing is, if this was the kind of game where, it was modular maybe, and you came back, and if you lose some resources that end up losing you the game, whatever, you'll have a different experience next time around. That's one thing. When you lose a few resources in this game, it could be the difference between winning and losing, trying to re-explore your way to these places. In fact, I think it could cost you quite a lot getting back to the areas where you need to go. And the thing is, if you lose, then you've got to work your way back through this 3 hours or whatever it is that you played through, because there's not like a checkpoint system here, right? Like, one of the things we were talking about just before we started recording this show was Carter said, what would it be like if they had a checkpoint system in here, where if you made it to a certain point and you lose, okay, well, we'll just come back here and we'll know that we can recover this much energy or whatever, and we can keep moving on with the game.
Right. You won't have maybe be as like fully equipped like you were on your initial run through, but it's not having to replay through the same exact chunks of content. I don't know. It seems like an easy solution to me.
It does to me too. And because that's not part of it, and because the game is so difficult to survive, the save system being another thing that punishes you mechanically is just off the wall bonkers to me. And the same thing is true with, like, if the cards that you have out for the island don't fit on your table anymore, or you're getting close to the table edge.
Yeah, you just get rid of all of the other terrain cards. You just recenter the one that all of the player characters are on.
Right. You get rid of the other terrain cards. And to be fair, in some parts of the map, it doesn't really matter if you get rid of them. Like, you've done your thing down there, you're not going to go back. But here's the thing. In the first Curse that I played, made it all the way to the southwestern corner of the map and found a thing that I needed to interact with to move on with the story. And I got there and I realized I've got one of 2 keys that I need to make this thing go so that I can move on to the next part. The key that I missed was in the northeast corner of the map. Now, one of the things that's brilliant about this game's movement system is when you're moving, you just pay the movement cost that's on your terrain card, and then you can move basically as many spaces as you want to, as long as that path isn't interrupted by like a required test or something blocking your path. But what that would have meant for me if I had saved my game and came back is, as I understand the rules, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong here, is that I would have had to re-explore all that terrain just to go back to where I had been before, to where I needed to get that second key that I missed. That is one of the worst ideas in board games, period.
I mean, I think there are points within the game that you can save with like basically no penalty, or like essentially no penalty.
Yes.
But it's one of those things that like you should only save at very specific places in my mind. And the idea of saving before that just because, or like the idea is like, oh, well, you can stop and save anywhere. It's like, well, yeah, that might be okay in some places, but other times you would be punished severely for doing that.
So here's the thing. At this point, we need to start kind of wrapping up the review because this episode's already going pretty long. We're going to start talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly for this game. And one of the things that we're going to have to do this time around that we don't always have to do is consider, even more than usual, whether this is a fit for you. Because your experience with this game, I think, is going to vary quite a bit depending on what you value and don't value in a game, and also what kind of table space you have and where you play games and whether you can leave this set up.
Yeah, I mean, because why would you save it unless you have to? Maybe there's a curse where the cards have more variability in it, so you're incentivized to it, but I would still think if you have like a game room or a table that will be undisturbed and it's very large, you would just keep this out.
Yep, you'll have a better time with this game if you have that.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just move right into the good, the bad, and the ugly for this game. And I think we'll have to say to start, there is so much good about this game. Like, if it's not evident from the first, half of this conversation, this game makes me feel like I am exploring a fascinating continent.
Yeah, it's fun to go through, explore, and discover the story and the continent and how it's laid out. I mean, and what's on the next tile over. It's a great feeling.
Yeah, the atmosphere is really spooky and kind of interesting and different from a lot of other games, I guess. There's not an easy comparison to make thematically for this game. It's got some definite Lovecraft vibes going on. It also has like some Robinson Crusoe vibes going on. It's just a lot of different things in one, but it works, I think.
Mm-hmm.
It's got a great atmosphere. Seeing this island unfold before you is amazing. It's just one of the coolest productions I've ever seen. Also, the decisions that you make with whether to make a test and whether to hang on to this card or this other card, whether now is the time to craft this item, whether I want to craft this item when I can only have 4 out in front of me. All of that for me is so good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Lots of great decisions with a card, the way the cards drive it. It's just a lot of interesting interconnected systems that I think work really well.
Yeah, and actually one of the things I was most worried about this game when I first heard about it was that it would just feel like the whole game is just like a bunch of random pulling cards, feeling like you're playing a little push your luck game whenever you make a decision. It's not that.
Mm-mm.
It's way more interesting and involved than that, and I love it. I also like the different abilities of the characters. The character art isn't great, but the fact that you can play as Victor Frankenstein or that you could play as H.P. Lovecraft or also just some generic characters for this game, that mix is great. Adds like a little bit of fun into an otherwise pretty grim experience. And just like the different abilities that they have, I think make that even your choice of character from curse to curse an interesting decision and will give you a significantly different kind of angle to play from game to game. Also, another good thing that I'm going to say here is that if you buy more of the curses themselves are quite different from one another. You might be visiting cards that you've seen before as like different parts of the island you've seen before, but they'll function radically differently, right? And what you'll experience when you interact with it will be totally different. So from curse to curse, that kind of replayability is amazing. And so there's a lot to like about this game. There are several things that I would consider to be bad. One of them is related to randomness, and I don't know fully whether I'll say this is a universally bad thing. It's going to be bad for some people. You will get hosed on some card pulls. You'll do your best to like play it safe and draw enough cards to get a success, and you won't get it, or you won't have found the items that you need to craft in order to have an easier time doing some of the tests that you'll interact with. That randomness is real in this game, and for a lot of people, that'll be bad. I didn't find it to be personally debilitating to my experience with the game.
Right. Yeah, I would say the randomness, it felt even-handed enough, but also, there's other games that I think a lot of people have an even-handed experience, but I just got really unlucky. So, I mean, most of the time it will be fine, I think.
I think for a lot of people, another bad thing about this game will be that this is essentially a consumable experience.
Yes.
This is going to have a finite number of plays, and I do think you'll get a lot of playtime out of it. I mean, it's not like Gloomhaven level of playtime, but it's a lot. I mean, the first curse alone, I suspect, would take 6 to 7 hours. And it sort of depends on how much you pour over the art and what you're looking for and all that. I think, and just how much time you're spent thinking about your decisions. But I think you're getting a lot of playtime out of each curse, which is pretty cool. So the base box with the Kickstarter version, at least, is pretty expensive, but it does come with 4 curses, so that's a lot of playtime. But those are the only things that I would consider bad for the game. There are some ugly things for this game.
Yeah. The having to start over from the beginning is definitely ugly for me.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe other people are fine with it. I mean, people love this game, and I think it's because it's a fun, great game for like most parts of it. And maybe other people just aren't bothered by this, but that's very ugly for me.
It is for me too. This is actually one of the things that killed Time Stories for me, which is not a game that we're going to review, but like the first experience of going through Time Stories was fascinating. Like, there's a lot of interesting things to do. The dice hose you way more often in that game than you get hosed in this. So that part of the game's just not. Mm-hmm. But if you fail a scenario and you have to go back, same problem. This is the problem with crafted experience games. I imagine it would be the same problem with Tainted Grail as well. I've already seen some complaints online about this. It's not just inherently better to have a crafted world. Always a trade-off.
Right.
And this is the trade-off. If they implemented like a checkpoint system or something in this, or if maybe they bring some of those changes to the Seventh Citadel, the new game in this series is coming to Kickstarter early next year, I really, really hope they consider something like that.
Yeah.
Because if they did, I would be willing to jump on board that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But for now, I'm like, man, my desire to replay that first curse and see what happens at the end of it is just dead at the moment.
Yeah, I don't want to do that. I would just try out something else. And I guess I would get around to it eventually, but it's nothing I'm like looking forward to. It's just kind of disappointing.
Yeah, I completely agree. The other ugly thing for us, obviously, is the save system.
Yeah. I mean, unless they just kind of come up with a different way of handling that, or there's just a better mechanical implementation other than just punishment. I don't know. Yeah, that's just firmly in the ugly column for me.
Yeah, honestly, what I would end up doing if I needed to save this game is take a picture of the board and just put the cards that were out like back in the box, I guess. Mm-hmm. And that makes setup tedious and annoying, but I would like it better than expending more energy to re-explore things. I mean, your mileage may vary with that. Obviously, some people think that it's a great system. In fact, a lot of people think it's a great system. I super hate it. Yep. So, and that's pretty much all of our thoughts on this game. So that brings us to the point of the review where we have to decide if this is a stomp of approval game or not. And if you are new to the show or you're not sure what the stomp of approval is, stomp of approval is an award that we give to games that we love, that we think are outstanding solo games, and that are excellent even if you only ever play them solo. And at this point, I should say, too, one more thing I would add to the good category and should have mentioned is that this has true solo play. Yep.
Not any, like, different setup. It feels great. I didn't think, like, oh, this would probably feel better with other people. No. You know, I'm sure it's fine with other people, but it feels great solo.
Man, it does. I don't think that you lose anything playing solo. In fact, I think you gain the experience of feeling like you could just like move along at whatever pace you want, which is super great. Mm-hmm. So I should have mentioned that there. So you already know that is definitely, if you're going to play this solo, the experience of playing it one player is excellent in that regard. But is this a stomp of approval game for you?
No, not for me. I mean, this is a fun game, but I think there's like one too many little things that kind of take away from it being a stomp game where I just like absolutely love it. And I just want to like kind of just that thing where it's like, I can't wait till the next time I get to play. To me, that's kind of part of like that like special something to a game where it's like, I'm still thinking about it. I want to play again. In this game, like after like losing, it was like, well, it'll be fun to play again someday.
I am also going to say this is not a stomp of approval game for me. But here's the thing. It is so close. The thing is about this game, I did play the first curse over the course of about 3 sessions because kids and they interrupt you or whatever and you've got to go do adult responsible things. Like go to work. And so before I lost the first time, as I was exploring, when I was away from the board, I was thinking about it constantly. Like, so for me, the exploration aspect did grab me in that way, just because I didn't sit down and do it all in one go.
Sure.
And I was just like, man, I wonder what's going to happen when I go to this place. I really think that next I ought to do this. And it really had its teeth in me big time. But as soon as I died and realized I'd have to play through 3 hours worth of former playtime just going through the motions, my desire to play this just all but died. I mean, I did play some more after that to try out some other stuff, but it's depressing.
Yeah.
It just is really soul killing in a way that other gaming experiences are not for me.
Yeah.
And that, for me, that and the save system thing are what keep this from being a stomp of approval game. Now, that being said, obviously a lot of people love it. This is, for a lot of people, their number one game, and for very good reason. I am also going to say here that I am stoked for the Seventh Citadel. Like, I want to know so badly what they've changed because I really, really hope it's the stuff that we're talking about. If
Yeah.
it is, this could be one of the best games ever for me.
Yeah, I'm totally on board if these things are addressed in some way.
The thing about truly great games for me is like when you talk about games that have mass appeal and, they have great sales numbers or whatever, often those games are not anybody's favorite game forever, right? I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say Azul. I love Azul. I think it's a great game. I think a lot of people think it's a great game because it sold a ton of copies. I would bet you that there aren't that many people that 5 years after they played Azul think that it's their favorite game ever. There's something about games that take major risks and that are divisive that really stick with some people and make it their number one.
Absolutely.
This is teetering so close to being that level of greatness for me. There's so much about it I love, but it's just a couple of really bad decisions away from that. But that's just my opinion. So that's our big anticipated Seventh Continent review. This is not a game that's going to get the stamp of approval from us, but it is a fascinating game, and it may be a great game for you. So if you have not already, please take a look at it, check it out. And before we end this, I want to make one quick note. For a long time, the Seventh Continent was a Kickstarter exclusive game, and it was pretty expensive to back it, although not necessarily expensive for what you get. And it's really expensive now if you want to try to get it on eBay or whatever. Thankfully, they have released a retail version of this called the Seventh Continent Classic Edition. You do lose about 100 cards that were Kickstarter exclusive cards, but you're still left with 839. Is that what they said?
I can't remember.
It was something ridiculous. And you are left with 3 of the 4 curses, and it costs $59.99 on their website. It's a great deal, I think.
Yeah, that's such a reasonable price for what you get in the game.
Yeah, it's much more approachable and affordable now. And so it doesn't come with the minis, and it doesn't come with the card holder. But honestly, the minis aren't that great, and the card holder is cool, but it's not something that you need at all.
We usually say the discard holder. It still has like the trays for the
cards.
cards.
Yeah, you're right. The discard holder. Yeah, but those are not essential at all.
Right.
So if you're interested in checking this out, you can now do so for a lower price of entry. And then there's still a couple of expansion packs available on their website. If you really like it, you can get another couple of curses.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're interested in that, check that out. I think you can only purchase that through the Serious Pulp website. So go and check that out there if you are interested. But folks, that is all for this episode. If you haven't yet, follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and you can find out what we're playing and what we're doing. So check us out on there. I usually mention this first at the end of the episode, but if you haven't heard, we are a Dice Tower Network podcast. So if you like our show and you want to find other shows like it, you can go on to dicetower.com and find out other shows in the network and find more that'll appeal to you and to what you're looking for in a show like this. And also, if you haven't already, please hit me up on BGG for some Geek Gold, and I will get you the gold that you need to get our Solosaurus micro badge. It's a great way to show that you are a fan of the show. I think there are something like 100 of those floating around Board Game Geek at this point. So if you want one of yours, but you don't want to pay for it, send me a message, and I will be happy to spot you the Geek Gold. And that's all we've got for this episode, folks. Until next time, my name is Brandon Waite.
And my name's Carter Mackey.
And this is Solosaurus.